In 1994, one of the most groundbreaking and important figures of the early punk music scene would go on to create possibly the most controversial comics company to ever exist. A company whose books were barely allowed to be sold in stores, who would be fraught with legal battles, but at the same time would work with legendary names such as Tim Vigil, Simon Bisley, Liam Sharp, Martin Edmond, Jay Lee, Hart Fisher, Joe Chiodo, and even the king of comics himself, Jack Kirby. A company who would find and discover names like John Cassaday. This is a company who would bring over the works of Go Nagai, the creator of Devilman, to America for the first time. That's right, the first time Devilman was printed in America was through this company. A company who had the first major crossover between a Japanese manga character and an American comics company. This company may not be known to most, but they had a hidden revolution in the 90s. This company was Verotik Comics. Glenn Danzig was the founder and main creative mind behind legendary punk band The Misfits. They themselves have a long, long history of controversies, chaos, and making waves throughout the decades. To this day, a band that shockingly has outlived what anyone could have predicted for them from their debut. A band whose most of their work and most of their prime time and their prime years would go on to small crowds in any city, in any state that wasn't New Jersey. However, Glenn Danzig, from the very beginning, made his love of comics and manga very well known. From classic images of him wearing the Captain Harlock shirt, to constantly talking about them in interviews and magazines, from famously using things like iconography from comic books in his artwork, befriending tons and tons and tons of comic artists over the years, eventually the snowballing in him wanting to create his own company. But it's Glenn Danzig, so this wasn't going to be the normal comic company that other people expected. And comics themselves were going through a crazy time in the late 80s, early 90s, as was Danzig himself. This is a time period that I feel like creatively the world was exploding with new things to experience. From Danzig himself going solo, creating his legendary band that would go on for his first 4 albums and make classics after classics, to the comic industry, the image revolution, the British invasion, everything going on right now. The comic legends and the history books are filled with these stories, but I feel like Verotik has been somewhat ignored. Glenn Danzig purposely made this company one that would not be easy to promote, not be easy to talk about, and would be talked about in hushed tones in comic shops across America. This was a comic company built around violence and eroticism. Verotik Comics. It is exactly what the name implies, but holy hell is there a lot more to the story than just some violent porno mags. Because as much as people want to write them off as that, this entire company would be a platform that many, many, many legendary artists would not only work on and work through, but contribute some pieces that have gone lost to most people. We're talking about stories from Grant Morrison that people don't talk about. Early Jay Lee work that is fucking insane. Eric Canetti getting some of his first work in all of comics through books like Satanic and Egret. There are constant examples in this company of not only setting up the future of comics, but making a definitive statement that they knew what they were and they didn't give a shit what anyone else wanted to do about it. A company, Verotik Comics at this point in time, from films like Header, Grub Girl, obviously the Danzig directed erotica movie. There are countless songs Danzig has made, countless legendary court cases that had to do with Verotik Comics. This also ties into Boneyard Press, another company that is fraught with legal battles. This entire network of comics and outlaw books is something that I find endlessly fascinating. Something that every time I think I know the most, I dig a little deeper and find something I had no clue about. They're the reason why I've wanted to make this video for a very long time. Because I feel like Verotik Comics, in a nutshell, is a company that did so much with so little people knowing about it even. I'm not exaggerating when I talk about the amount of incredible names that worked on these books, and because they kind of didn't have a true censor board or anything like that. You're seeing creatives go all in without holding back at all. And I mean at all. This video itself, I can't show 90% of the artwork from these books. I don't care how beautiful they are. Half of the characters just live in a state of either extreme violence or extreme sexuality. Characters like Satanica, who though at one point almost had a Madhouse TV show, the character, of course, basically 99% of the time is tits out. So a character that makes it very hard to talk about and put on the YouTube, but this shit ain't getting monetized, so fuck it. I just want to spread the word of this insane comic company. Because for the past few months, I have been deep diving through basically their entire catalog. I mean, for years, I have been obsessed with them. I will be honest. You can ask any of my friends. Anytime I'm in any comic shop, if there's a Verotik book, I'm buying it. I'm going on my way, going to Danzig's eBay, buying it off of him directly. I've seen Danzig live, buying books at his shows, going to his movie premieres. This has been a odd obsession of mine for a long time. Not to mention Simon Bisley being one of my all-time favorite artists, and some of, I think, my favorite work of his being in these books. Eric Canetti, who just worked on Absolute Batman 17 and 18, I mean, who's making literally one of the biggest one of the biggest books in the world. This man started doing books like Satanica because Danzig loved Aeon Flux and wanted to get some of that flavor into Verotik. Danzig himself, although a controversial figure and one who there is no lack of opinions on, one thing he has always had is an eye for talent and an eye for seeing what might be on the way to come. He may not always exceed at executing those ideas himself, but he's always around the right ballpark. And seeing some of the names that worked on these books, it is just insane. Insane. A lot of this goes back to Danzig's early years. I'm talking the late 70s with Plan 9 Records. It was originally known as Blank Records. He traded the name for studio time to record Static Age and eventually would use Evil Live instead. This, again, from the very beginning of Danzig's career, he's kind of always done things his way. Love him, hate him, no matter how you feel about him. He's live by the sword, die by the sword type of guy. And his vision has been the basis for basically all of his work. That extends to Verotik, too. Now, I know your mileage will vary on how you feel about that, and I'm not here to tell you that you should like these hyper-violent books or that you should be obsessed with them or anything like that, but all I am saying is it is a part of comics history that needs to be studied. From the I mentioned in the intro, bringing Go Nagai's Devilman to America, utter insanity that does not get the credit for that. I mean, we're talking about Devilman, a property that now has gone on to have the Netflix adaptations that won countless awards, OVAs, all kinds of different media over the years. And it's all started, at least on the American side, with Danzig befriending Go Nagai. There are so many things to attribute to this company that just does not ever get talked about. So that'll be kind of the crux of what we're going to go over here today. The history of Verotik Comics. Some of the high points, some of the low points, and everything in between. Thank you for joining me on this weird journey. Because I don't know how long this is going to go for. I don't know how deep this is going to get. This is a rabbit hole that I love. And we're going to climb deep inside. So thank you for being part of this journey. And buckle up. But it all starts with Verotik. So, as with many projects, the only place to start here that makes sense is a little bit before the beginning of Verotik Comics. Because, see, this was a very interesting point in the career of Glenn Danzig. He had already conquered the punk world with the Misfits, had already been experimental with Samhain, how the fuck you want to say it, and had gone full into his solo career by this point in time. But little do people remember, although Mother would become a great hit when it was originally released in 1988, it was not. It took a while and a whole new EP for that to gain legs. And in 93, Mother became a massive, giant hit for Danzig. Probably, some would argue, his first truly only true hit. But timing wise, this allowed him a lot of new opportunities because his name value is higher than ever. You also had around this time Metallica getting bigger and bigger, starting to openly express how big of an influence Danzig and the Misfits were to them, bring new eyes to Danzig that way. This is before the Garage Inc. album, so you don't quite have that full hit of the Metallica crossover to Danzig, but you're getting a little bit here. But with the massive hit that was Mother and new opportunities, new eyes on Danzig, the lifelong comic fan did what any single one of us would do. Start his own comics company with a healthy focus on the things he loved most about comics. Because if anyone listening to this didn't know already, I've already mentioned it, Danzig has been a lifelong comic collector and true fan. There are countless videos of him throughout the years talking about comics, reading comics. There's a few famous ones and clips that get used and shared all the time. You might be looking at some of those clips right now as I'm talking to this. I haven't edited the video part of it yet, so who the fuck knows? But Danzig, true comics fan. And as if you couldn't tell, no one gets into comics to make money. No one gets into violent and sexual underground comics for money, especially. You only do that shit if you have a very big interest and want to spread that. And that's what Danzig wanted to do. Danzig being a fan of the more violent side of comics, the darker, more risque, old EC comics type stuff. The stuff that made parents in the 40s, 50s, and 60s scream and cry and cause a cultural revolution in itself. That's the type of shit that Danzig loved and still probably loves today. So yeah, Danzig starts Verotik Comics, and it starts with none other than Verotika. And Verotika is a anthology series, one of the longest running series to date when it comes to Verotik Comics. But I think kind of the perfect encapsulation of what Verotik would become not only known for, but this is their message to the world of we're here, we've arrived, and they did it in a crazy way. Not enough people talk about this. Fucking A. Verotika issue number 1, not only does it feature obvious hits and obvious classics of the Verotik team like Danzig himself and Bisley, but also Grant fucking Morrison. Like, that is something, look, I'm a huge Danzig fan, but I might be an even bigger fan of Grant Morrison, and I had no fucking idea that Grant Morrison not only worked with Danzig, but worked on a couple of issues of Verotika. Something that I was shocked to learn, because again, this is a company that was basically what led me to want to make this video even. Because so many people, when they talk about comics, especially the 90s, like there's a ton of awesome and incredible companies that came out in the 80s and 90s in comics. It was a not only cultural revolution and art revolution, but pop culture was changing, and what was allowed in not just the mainstream, but what was allowed in the underground had changed, and people were pushing boundaries. And I think a lot of other companies get light to that. But again, this a book with Grant Morrison, Danzig, and Simon Bisley, the book that people to this day, half of them don't know exists, and that is bizarre to me. And part of that is, of course, the content of the comics, because they are exactly what the name implies. It is violent, it is sexual, violence and erotica, Verotika Comics, erotic comics. It lives up to the name in every way. But I also think it is something that in today's day and age, when more and more risque things are getting harder and harder to find, when people are becoming more and more prudish on what they allow others to see, what they themselves share, what they consume, it is to this day kind of crazy to go back and look at these early issues and see just not only what they got away with, and look, we will get to some controversies. I say get away with loosely, because they definitely got into a lot of hot water over the years, specifically with a few of their crazier books. But for right now, 94, you launch with Verotika. And again, you're launching out the gate, swinging for the fences. You're going full violence, full erotic. Grant Morrison, Simon Bisley, Glenn Danzig. It's 1994. This is hitting hard, but it's also 1994. So to put that in preference, the internet is in its early infancy for most people. This is not a time period where you can just go look at different underground websites. You can go search out shops. You can go search out things. No. This is, you are having to do the research. You are walking to comic shops, and because of the nature of these books, most comic shops won't or can't keep these in stock. They either don't. You have a lot of fans that don't know they exist. You have a lot of fans that they want them, but shops aren't carrying them because they are books that are hard to carry for a store. You can't sell these to anybody and everybody. You can't have them just being able to be flipped through by anyone and everyone, because there is stuff in them that would cause issues with people of all kinds of different backgrounds and beliefs. And I'm making this video. I like anything that pushes the boundaries, that pushes buttons like that. So a series like this, you can't really, it's hard to quantify in today's day and age when you can look up any crazy thing, and if you dig deep enough, you can find it. This was a comic series that for some people, no comic shop in their state would carry. While doing research, I found out that in close friends of mine living in other states, that it'd be boiled down to there might be one shop in the entire state that would actually carry Verotik books. So even if you wanted to go out and pick up this incredible first issue, you had to do some hunting to find it. You had to know about it, live about it, dig it, and fucking love it. And again, Verotik would go on to be one of their longest running series, and again, an anthology, just exactly what the name entails. You had nothing but violence and eroticism combined, and it's really funny because we have a lot of movies like Hellraiser and other things in pop culture that kind of pushes that thin line between violence and sexuality. And in the comics world, I feel like we get a lot of books that claim to do that, but very few actually go full on. And look, sometimes Verotik Comics has the subtlety of a nuclear bomb dropping. I'm not going to claim that every book that was published was the highest of quality, but I will defend to the death that every book that came out of this company lived up to what you were expecting to get from this company, and having an identity that no other company at the time had. But yeah, let's go. Starting off with 94. Part of the reason that this company had this type of vibe, had this type of energy, was not just Glenn Danzig. Behind the scenes, you had a murderer's row, literally a murderer's row, basically, of people that had not only worked in the comic books field before, but also came from outlaw and underground shit. Originally, the company had a lead editor-in-chief, Valerie Jones, from New Comics Group. Jones left at the end of 95, then came Stephen Wardlaw, and eventually the most famous name attached with this one, and the name that most people will recognize who are reading these type of comics, would of course be Hart D. Fisher. He worked as an editor from 94 to 95. So again, as you can tell, all these within a very quick year and a half of opening. A lot of changes, a lot of new names coming in and out of power positions, a lot of editors going in and out. But part of that being them trying to find that identity. And I think with Hart Fisher, obviously the Boneyard Press connection, you have that edgy alt underground outlaw vibe, and immediately shoved into this world. And again, for a comic company that hadn't been around that long, there's a lot of things happening. Because also in 94, the first lawsuit happened, which was Verotik dipping their toes into reprinting some classic comics and some stuff that legally thought they were okay to do and thought they had the rights to, but unfortunately in 1994 Verotik published Phantom Lady reprints, and AC Comics sued them because they at the time had the rights. And this would be not the first, this would be the first, but not the only lawsuit that would come against Verotik. Though I will say the trademark infringement lawsuit, oddly enough, one of the least interesting lawsuits the company would go through. In a couple of years in 96, they would go through a much crazier, much crazier one. Because in 96, we'll jump right to it. We're already talking about it's been 96. Because a couple of years later, the lawsuits would continue because in Oklahoma City, a comics retailer named Planet Comics, they were accused of trafficking in obscene materials because they were selling copies of Verotika issue number 4. So again, put that in preference. This is a comic book company selling a comic and being sued because the contents of that comic were considered so obscene, so vulgar, that they legally could not be sold in the state of Oklahoma. Uh, hey, this is again a crazy lawsuit. It was in March of '96. Uh, they had again. It's almost laughable because there are so few cases of comics. There are a lot of cases of comics being accused of horrible things, and a couple of big cases of them actually going to court and actually having to face that. Just being one of those cases because Verotica #4 again. Uh, it's a book called Verotica. You would kind of think it tells itself, but no. There was this is a court case that would go on for years. It would include raiding shops. It would involve the Christian Coalition, Oklahoma, for children and families, and of course Oklahoma City Police. It would involve all kinds of stuff. Eventually, the actual trial was set for September 8th, 1997, but because they didn't want to risk a permanent felony on the records, the retailers agreed to plead guilty. They faced 2 felony charges. In exchange, they were granted a 3-year deferred prison sentence and a fine of $1,500 each. But put that in preference. Think of this shop for 2 years having to deal with the ramifications of selling a single issue that other groups felt were so vulgar that they felt it should not be viewable by the public. I'll be honest, probably was the worst, most awful thing to go through that you can imagine for a lot of people involved. However, it also adds a very badass reputation to this company. Because holy fuck, to get to that point where you are already dealing so early in your comics company, you are already dealing with your second major lawsuit and your second major public fight. And again, at this point in time, you haven't even released that many comics. They still had not released a lot of their big heavy hitters that they would become known for. I mean, we mentioned it earlier. This is a company that you had Hart Fisher involved. Boneyard Press, a company they themselves have a very long history of legal issues with some of the content they sold. And of course, Verotik being teamed up with Hart Fisher, some of their books would be moved through Verotik. So you had a lot of those books that you recognize from Boneyard Press also coming out through Verotik, which probably did not make things any easier whatsoever. But Danzig was a man who was kind of used to this. Since the early days of Misfits, even back in the 70s, Danzig kind of rolled with the punches. I mean, people forget Plan 9 Records was originally known as Blank Records from in 76, 77. And he literally traded that name for studio time to record Static Age, which I believe is my personal opinion for the greatest punk album ever made. That's a side note in a very different video. But again, Danzig has always kind of had this independent outlaw spirit that led to, fuck it, cool. I got cool name Blank Records. Oh, you want to trade it for studio time? You want that name? Fine. I'll do Plan 9 Records. Of course, Evil Live would eventually become a major part of the Danzig sphere. This is a man who, whether you love him, whether you hate him, there's a reason why he has stayed a prominent figure for so long in not just the world of music, but comics and even movies. I mean, again, who would have guessed that a company like this would have multiple movies? Now, when I say multiple movies, they run the gamut of everything from things like Grub Girl, which is just a straight-up porn adaptation, all the way to Verotic itself, the movie, the Verotica movie based on different characters, different things in an anthology movie format itself, and Danzig directing. There has been several projects that almost came to be. We were talking about the lawsuit in '96. Around that, right before those lawsuits, you had the launch of the book that they would become most known for, which would be Satanica. The first miniseries was launching in July of '95, and it would become an iconic series for the company. Yeah, so iconic that just a couple years later, in 1997, it would have production on a Madhouse anime would begin. You, if you're a fan, you can go up, you can look up the trailer for the Satanica anime. The short has been up for years, and I remember as a kid, it just became something of like what could have been this insane thing that almost happened. Because again, who would have fucking guessed that a book like Satanica could end up having not only an anime adaptation, but being connected to some of the biggest names of anime at the time. And from the surface, it looks shocking, but underneath, it's not that shocking. I mean, famously, Eric Canetti, a man that would go on to work for several different Verotik projects. A man that, again, literally just as I'm recording this, a few months ago, was he one of the fill-in artists for Absolute Batman in the Poison Ivy arc, an arc that was incredible, and he also got to kind of go back to some of his more, almost some of his more Satanica days art style. It was very, very awesome to see. But no, I mean, early on, Danzig had an eye for talent. How Eric Canetti came about being involved in Verotik comics to begin with was Danzig being a very big fan of Peter Chung and Aeon Flux and the weird new styles that were popularizing there. And he tried to originally get Peter Chung. Peter sent over Eric Canetti to do it, and Eric Canetti would become a workhorse in Verotik for a while on several different titles, and really getting to explore that burgeoning Western anime style mixed with this violent underground style. There's a lot of names connected to Verotik that got to just to be experimental, be weird. Eric Canetti earlier this year talked about stories of Danzig having a special phone that Frank Frazetta would call, and he would drop off pages, drop off covers, and it was a direct line. That was it. I mean, we have literally some of the biggest names in comics that would be working on these books, and every time you read one of these books, you read it and you can tell they are just having a shit ton of fun being able to just have no limits whatsoever. I mean, people talk about limits, but when you talk about that, you're talking about no limits at all. And again, you combine these up and comers with things like, if you're a fan of outlaw shit, Alphabet of Murder was also in '94, a book that a lot of people at the time were already hunting down that were into the how to put the more grimy, dirty underground scene of books. And you get a book like Satanica, holy hell, it's a calling. I mean, for me personally, one of the coolest things that Verotik did that does not get enough credit was Verotik became one of the first companies, I believe the first company in America to bring over Devilman, which is insane. They probably the most successful line of reprinted books was between 94 and 98, where they were the first U.S. publisher to translate and publish Go Nagai's Devilman, a property that has influenced countless people. And the first time it came to America was through Verotik. And not to mention some fucking killer Simon Bisley covers. There is some insane work out there for those. And just, again, Danzig understanding, kind of being, people may hate this and think I'm just sucking off Danzig here, but dude was already into weird underground anime. Of course, he would have just, I mean, straight up basically hentai comics and very pushing boundaries, full on sexual comics. But he had that eye for anime and manga, and way before it was popular to do, started incorporating that into his line of books, starting to bring people like that, reaching out, finding Go Nagai, finding ways to make those reprints happen in America, which people can take for granted because it sounds like something that is, just a small little deal. But no, that was legitimately something that the first time a lot of people would ever get to experience something from Go Nagai was Devilman. And it was through that, which I think that, again, does not get enough credit for just how important that is to the overall nature of the way that all this goes. I think Verotik is a connecting point between several different major moments in comics and in just art in general. I mean, the culmination of all these different extremely talented people being in the same rooms, talking, experimenting, putting out books. And again, when you were putting out books like, like Death Dealer or Morella, when you're talking about having also just putting out books like from Frank Frazetta and Chiodo and Joe Chiodo and other artists, where it's art books that they're able to release and put out for some of the first times in America, and having people kind of understanding that, oh shit, the art can be more important than the characters I'm following. I just like these people for the characters they're creating. And yeah, there were some blatant characters. I mean, Satanica herself, there's tons of arguments that's like, oh, she's just a blatant Devilman ripoff, or she's this, or she's that. It's like, no, I think a lot of it comes from this fandom of these different extreme cultures, and finding ways to put them on the same boat and make them feel like they belong together. And that is something that Verotik from day one really had, this identity of violence and eroticism. They lived up to their name in every way. And it is something that I think you still see the ramifications of in many, many places. We've talked a little bit about the comics and a little bit about the possible anime. Jumping over to the movie world, I mentioned earlier that Grub Girl did get a full-on porno. The only way it could happen, to be honest. That is a book, and that is a idea that you kind of can only do in that way. That would come out in 2006. Way before that even came out, Verotik published Edward Lee's novel Header, and in 95 that book was adapted to a feature film. The Grub Girl film, of course, would also it would be directed by Craven Moorhead, who would go on to work with Danzig on several music videos, like Crawl Across Your Killing tongue-tied that. Crawl Across Your Killing Floor. The soundtrack for it would include remixes of songs. Then, I mentioned a few years later, the Satanica movie would finally the Verotica movie would finally actually release. That was in 2019. And again, it's an anthology that features several of the characters from the world of erotic comics. Recently, just a couple of years ago, Danzig continued making his movies, where he had say his movies, because some people I know really hate them. But Death Rider in the House of Vampires, another movie just like, I kind of appreciate Danzig's creativity and powerhouse ability to be able to see a project, want to do it, and whether you love the finale, whether you love how it turned out or hated how it turned out, the motherfucker did it. And continues to just push through and make things happen. And again, the more I dug into this before I recorded this video, I read the vast majority of erotic content that I could. I mean, I have a short box and a half of now erotic comics that have given me a whole new appreciation for not only Danzig behind it, but several of the artists behind it, and also just how concise of a label this has always been. Again, still putting out books to this day, still having just some fun shit, and also just knowing what they were and what they are. Some of their biggest claims to fame, a lot of people don't realize, is they were the ones who discovered John Cassaday. A huge name in that. Boneyard Press alone has some crazy connections to Gerard Way. You're talking about all these names that would go on to create genre-defining pieces of music, art, movies, and everything in between. And so many of them either got their start or got a weird chance through this weird little company that for a very, very long time now, we're passing 30 years, has continued to just chug along and release its own thing by its own rules, for its fans, by its fans. It's a cult-like comics company that we don't see a lot of anymore. I feel like nowadays you see a lot of comics companies where character goes above all, or company goes above all, because you have a cult of personality like Danzig at the head of this whole thing, because you have a hardcore fan base that will eat up anything that comes out. You almost don't have to worry about this like month-to-month release schedule. You don't have to worry about these vast distribution channels. A lot of it today is buying Verotik comics directly from the Verotik eBay page, and just enjoying the fuck out of them. I mean, I can't tell you how much fun I had just going through a lot of these titles, reading all of Satanica, reading all of Erotica, finding some hidden gems and some shit that I didn't think I would love, and I ended up, being big fans of things like Albino Spider, Dejet, Dark Horror Morella. Again, I'm a huge Simon Bisley fan, so it's just a constant stream of incredible biz work out there. I will say this alone: if you are a Simon Bisley fan and you have not dove in to Verotik, you're not only missing out, you're doing yourself a disservice as a fan. Because holy hell, same thing with Eric Canetti. I think some of it's early work for him, but you can see who he would evolve into and the artists that he would become through these very unique characters and him just not having rules. And I think in a world that feels so beholden and so strict to format and structure and how you have to create something and how it has to be done and why it's done, I think it's good to look back at companies and times and places that were free and that were able to let the chains go and truly give creatives a place to learn from each other, to create with each other, and to just do some gnarly growth shit because they wanted to do it without any other reason than they could. This is part 1 of this series. I do think there will be more parts. Let me know. This is just a quick introduction to it. Thank you for watching episode 1. Coming up in this series, we are going to do some straight up actual deep dives. So hold me to it. If you want more of this, there will be more of it. We got Verotica, we got Satanica. Those will be the first ones up. And some little history videos in between. Thank you so much for listening to this. There will be more. I'll be honest, it's probably going to be more whether you want it to be or not, because I just love this world, and I love digging into it. I literally have Verotica on the screen in front of me right now in all of its weird, silly glory. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to this. I will see you guys in another video soon. Thank you.